You know what's worse than being alone in an empty building at 3 in the morning? Being alone in an empty building at 3 in the morning and realizing you're not actually alone. That specific realization, that moment when your brain stops lying to itself and admits that something is fundamentally wrong with your situation, that's what these 3 stories are about. Real people, real locations, real experiences that nobody believed until it was too late to matter. I've changed some names because people asked me to, but everything else, the details that make your skin crawl, those are exactly as they were told to me. The first one comes from a woman named Jessica, who worked as a property manager for a commercial real estate company in Michigan. Her job was simple enough: drive around to various empty properties they owned, make sure nobody had broken in, document any damage, basically be eyes on locations that were between tenants. Most of the buildings were fine, boring even. Just empty retail spaces or small office buildings that smelled like old carpet and had that specific sadness of places waiting to be wanted again. But there was one property, a 3-story former insurance office in a suburb outside Detroit, that she started dreading around week 2 of her rotation. The building had been empty for about 18 months when Jessica started checking on it. Standard layout, ground floor reception area with a waiting room, 2nd and 3rd floors divided into cubicles and private offices, most of the furniture removed, but some pieces left behind like nobody could be bothered to finish the job. The property management company had installed a basic security system, just cameras in the stairwells and main entrance, motion sensors on the doors, nothing sophisticated. Jessica's job was to walk through once a week. Thursday afternoons usually, make her notes, lock up, move on to the next property. Except the cameras kept triggering at night. Not the motion sensors on the doors, those were fine, never went off. Just the interior cameras, recording movement in the stairwells between 2 and 4 in the morning, almost every night. Jessica's supervisor asked her to stay late one Thursday, do her check after dark to see if she could spot what was triggering the system. Maybe it was an animal that got in somehow. Maybe the sensors were too sensitive. Maybe there was a draft causing something to sway in front of the lens. So Jessica showed up at 9 p.m. instead of her usual 2 in the afternoon, and the difference was immediate. The building felt wrong at night. She told me that's the only way she could describe it. During the day, it was just sad and empty, but at night it had presence, had weight, like the darkness inside was denser than normal darkness should be. She unlocked the front door and the smell hit her first. Mold and dust, sure, every empty building has that, but underneath it, something else. Something organic and slightly sweet like fruit going bad in a forgotten lunch bag. She called out, standard procedure, announced herself as property management, gave anyone who might be squatting inside a chance to leave peacefully. No response. Just that heavy silence that seems to push against your eardrums. Jessica started on the ground floor, checking each room methodically. The waiting area with its outdated magazines still fanned across a coffee table. The reception desk with a computer monitor sitting at an angle like someone had been interrupted mid-task and never came back. Everything covered in that fine gray dust that accumulates when air conditioning stops circulating, when nobody's walking through and disturbing the particles, when a space is truly abandoned. Her footsteps were loud in that silence, each step on the industrial carpet making a soft crushing sound, and she became very aware of her breathing, of the small noises her jacket made when she moved. The stairwell to the 2nd floor was where the cameras were positioned, one at the bottom looking up, one at the top looking down. Jessica checked the camera at the bottom, made sure it was recording, saw the little red light that meant it was active. Then she started climbing, and that's when she heard it. Footsteps above her. Not on the 2nd floor landing, but higher. On the 3rd floor, the rhythm of someone walking at a normal pace across the empty offices. She froze on the stairs halfway between floors. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. She waited, listening so hard she could hear her own pulse. Nothing. She continued up to the 2nd floor, pushed open the door, swept her flashlight across the open space. The cubicles were still there, gray fabric walls about 5 feet high creating a maze of empty workstations, and the dust on every surface was undisturbed, perfect, like snow that nobody had walked through. But she could see the camera mounted in the corner, see its red recording light, and she had that feeling, you know the one I'm talking about, that sensation of being watched. Not just observed casually, but studied, examined, the way you might look at an insect crawling across your kitchen counter while you decide what to do about it. She turned slowly, scanning the space, and every cubicle looked the same, empty and gray and still. but the feeling didn't go away. Jessica decided to check the third floor, see if she could find a source for the footsteps. The second stairwell camera was right there at the landing, and as she passed it, she looked directly at the lens, some impulse to acknowledge that she knew she was being recorded. The climb to the third floor felt longer than it should have, the air getting thicker, harder to breathe, that moldy smell intensifying until she could taste it coating her tongue. When she opened the door to the third floor, the smell got worse. Not just mold now, but something chemical. Old office equipment maybe, toner and printer ink and whatever compounds leak out of electronics when they sit unused for years. The third floor was different from the second. The cubicles here had been partially dismantled, walls torn down and stacked against the windows, creating these strange barricades that blocked most of the ambient light from the street. Jessica's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching edges and corners, throwing shadows that moved when she moved. She walked carefully, checking each area, looking for any sign that someone had been up here, and that's when she found the footprints. Fresh ones, not covered in dust but pressed into the dust, like someone had been walking barefoot across the floor very recently. The prints went from the stairwell door to the center of the floor and then back again. A simple path there and back, and the stride length was wrong, too long, like whoever made them had legs that didn't quite match human proportions. She followed the prints to where they ended in the middle of the floor, and there was nothing there. No hiding spot, no exit, no explanation. Just an empty point in space where the footprint stopped and the dust beyond was undisturbed. Jessica stood there trying to make sense of it, and that's when she heard the footsteps again. But this time they were on the second floor, directly below where she was standing. The same normal walking pace, moving across the space she'd just checked, the space where the dust had been perfect and untouched. She ran for the stairwell, her composure completely gone, and as she hit the stairs going down, she heard them again. Footsteps in the stairwell below her, footsteps climbing up toward her while she was climbing down, and for one horrible moment she thought she was going to meet whatever was making that sound on the stairs between floors. But when she reached the second floor landing, there was nothing there, just the camera with its red light and the door to the second floor standing open, even though she was certain she'd closed it. Jessica didn't check that floor again, just kept going down to the ground level, out the front door, to her car, where she sat with the doors locked and the engine running for 20 minutes before she could make herself drive away. She told her supervisor the next day that she'd checked the building and found no signs of intrusion, no animals, no obvious explanation for the camera triggers. She didn't mention the footsteps or the footprints or the way the doors seemed to open on their own. She just said the sensors were probably faulty and maybe they should have the system serviced. Then she requested a different property rotation and never went back to that building again. The second story is from a security guard named Marcus. Different Marcus from the gas station story I told before. This Marcus worked at a shopping mall, one of those dying malls that's maybe 30% occupied, and they keep the lights off in the empty sections to save money. His shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and his route took him through both the active areas and the dead zones, the parts of the mall where stores had closed and their spaces sat empty behind pull-down gates, where the fountains had been drained and the plants had died and the only sound was the hum of emergency lighting. I'm curious where you're listening to this right now, actually. Are you in bed telling yourself you'll turn it off in just a minute? Driving somewhere with the darkness pressing against your windows? Maybe you're at work on your own night shift, understanding exactly the kind of isolation these stories describe. Drop your location and time in the comments, nothing specific, just city and hour, just so I know I'm not talking into the void here, so I know someone else is awake at whatever ungodly hour you're hearing my voice. Marcus told me the mall felt like a body that was slowly dying, keeping some organs functional while others shut down. The food court still had 3 restaurants open, so that area stayed bright and relatively maintained. The anchor store at the East End was still operating, so that wing got traffic. But the West Wing, that was dead, probably 20 empty storefronts in a row, and walking through there at night felt like walking through a tomb. The smell was different in the dead sections. Not moldy exactly because the climate control still worked, but stale, lifeless, like air that had been breathed too many times and never refreshed. And the dust, even though cleaning crews still came through once a week, the dust seemed to settle faster in the abandoned areas, accumulating on the benches and the empty display cases and the tile floors that had once reflected the bright colors of merchandise and now just reflected the dim emergency lights. The security office had monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the mall, and Marcus said he'd watch those screens during his rounds, see his own figure moving through the spaces in grainy black and white, a solitary person in what should have been a place full of people. But some of the cameras in the dead wing had stopped working, their feeds showing nothing but static or frozen images from months ago. Nobody bothered fixing them because what was the point? There was nothing to steal from empty stores, no reason to monitor spaces nobody used. Except Marcus started noticing something on the working cameras. In the dead wing, there was still one camera operational, mounted at the intersection where the main corridor met the side hallway that led to the old Sears storage area. And on that camera, maybe once a week, he'd see movement. Just for a few frames, a shadow crossing the field of view, or what looked like someone walking past, just out of frame. He'd review the footage later and it was always the same, something that suggested presence without actually showing anything concrete. He mentioned it to his supervisor, who said it was probably light playing tricks, reflections from the parking lot causing shadows, nothing to worry about. But then Marcus was doing a walkthrough at 2:30 in the morning, and he was in the dead wing, passing those empty storefronts with their dark interiors and their gates pulled down. And he heard it, footsteps echoing off the tile floor. The distinctive sound of shoes on that particular surface coming from deeper in the wing, from the direction of the old Sears. He stopped walking. The footsteps continued, getting closer, the rhythm steady and unhurried. Marcus called out, identified himself as security, said the mall was closed and whoever was there needed to leave. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then they started again, but now they were behind him, back where he just walked from, and when he spun around with his flashlight there was nothing there, just empty corridor and closed storefronts and his own reflection in the dark glass. He went back to the security office, pulled up the camera feed for that wing, and watched it live. The single working camera showed the intersection, showed the empty corridor, showed absolutely nothing moving. But he could hear them on his radio, the footsteps, because his radio was picking up the sound from the security station he'd passed in the dead wing, and those stations had microphones that fed into the radio system. He was hearing the footsteps through the radio while watching the camera show an empty corridor, and the disconnect between what his ears told him and what his eyes showed him made something in his brain rebel, made him feel nauseous and dizzy like reality itself was malfunctioning. Marcus quit 2 weeks later, found a job doing security at a hospital where there were always people around, always light, always the noise and chaos of the living. He told me he still thinks about that mall sometimes, about those footsteps that existed in sound but not in sight, and he wonders if maybe the cameras were showing the truth and his ears were lying, or if maybe his ears were showing the truth and the cameras were lying, or if maybe truth itself is more complicated than we want to believe. The third story is the shortest, but somehow it bothers me the most. A custodian named Robert worked at a 5-story office building in Oregon, regular day shift mostly, but sometimes he'd have to go in at night if there was a special cleaning job, or if something needed fixing that couldn't wait until morning. The building was occupied, full of tech companies and startups, but at night it was empty. Everyone gone home, just Robert and his keys and his cleaning cart rolling across the empty floors. The building had cameras everywhere, modern system, high resolution, motion-activated recording. Robert knew where they all were because sometimes he'd have to clean the camera housings or report if one seemed to be malfunctioning. He told me he'd gotten used to them, didn't even notice them anymore. They were just part of the building's infrastructure like the lights or the air conditioning. But one night he was on the 4th floor, vacuuming the corridor outside the executive offices, and he got that feeling. You know the one. That prickle on the back of your neck that says you're being watched. He looked around, didn't see anyone, but the feeling intensified. He looked up at the nearest camera and its light was off, not recording. He checked the next camera in the corridor. Light off. He walked the entire floor, and every single camera was dark. No power, no recording, completely dead, even though the rest of the building's systems were functioning perfectly. Robert called building maintenance, asked if there was a planned shutdown of the security system. No shutdown scheduled, system should be fully operational. He went down to the ground floor where the security office was located, checked the monitor panel. All cameras showing offline, all feeds dead. He was about to call the security company when the cameras came back on, all of them simultaneously. Every screen showing its feed, showing empty corridors and dark offices and Robert himself standing in the security office looking at the monitors. No explanation, no power surge, no technical glitch that would cause every camera to fail and then restore at exactly the same moment. But here's what made Robert start looking for a different job. When he went back up to the 4th floor to finish vacuuming, The dust on the floor near where he'd been working, there were footprints. Not his footprints, he was wearing work boots with a distinct tread pattern. These were bare feet, or maybe socks, multiple sets of them, walking in circles around the spot where his vacuum had been sitting while the cameras were down. Like something had been there in the dark, had walked around him while the cameras couldn't see, and had left its mark in the thin layer of dust that always settled overnight in office buildings no matter how well they were maintained. Robert finished his shift, turned in his 2-week notice the next morning, and now he works at a car wash where everything happens outside in daylight, and there are no cameras and nothing watches him except the sky. These stories connect somehow, I think. Different people, different locations, different specifics, but they all involve that same disconnect between what should be there and what is there, between the presence that recordings don't capture and the absence that our senses refuse to accept. We build these systems, these cameras and sensors and monitoring equipment, and we trust them to show us truth. But what if they're only showing us part of the truth? What if some things move in the spaces between frames, exist in the moments when technology blinks, walk on floors that cameras insist are empty? I don't have answers, just these stories, just these experiences that people trusted me with because they needed someone to believe them. And I do believe them, because I've felt it too, that sensation of being watched by something that isn't there. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, most of us have felt it at some point, standing alone in the dark, knowing we're not alone at all.